for coming to Design for Drupal, the 10th year, as well as my talk, Inclusive Design, Thinking Beyond Accessibility. I will say just a little bit of history. So my first time ever presenting at a Drupal conference was 2013 Design for Drupal in room 144, which I got to present there yesterday. So it was just exciting to be back and presenting at D4D and having much more experience. So I'm not as nervous now as I was 5 years ago when I presented. So, and I really like this topic, so I hope you get something out of it. So before we get started, a little bit about myself. My name is Mike Miles, and I've been working with Drupal for about a decade now. I've done everything under the sun when it comes to Drupal, from theming to content entry to module development. I maintain a few modules. Most of the time now I do large-scale Drupal architecture. I run the Boston Drupal meetup group, which kudos to the community for pitching in and letting us support this camp this year. You should join us the first Tuesday of every month. We have a meetup here in the city of Boston. Free pizza, if you don't get sick of free pizza. During the day, I am the VP of Technology for a digital marketing agency called Genuine. Genuine, we are a full-service digital agency, and we build agile brands. So what that means is we use our full in-house suite of services to deliver brands that customers love. And when I say in-house services, we have digital strategists, UX designers, a design team, a video production team with our own in-house studio in our Boston office, SEO experts, and then development across a number of technologies, .NET technologies, PHP technologies, front-end technologies. For PHP, most of our work is with Drupal. And then at night, I run the podcast called Developing Up, which is focused on the non-technical side of being a developer. So anything that relates to your career as a developer, but not related to the code you have to write. So things about making sure you're progressing in the career the way you want to. So check that out at developingup.com. Anything else you want to know about me, if you care to know any more about me, you can find me anywhere on the internet at MikeMiles86, from my Twitter account to my Drupal.org account to my LinkedIn account. So I believe that everyone in this room, we have one thing in common. It's not our love for Drupal, it's not our love for Design for Drupal. It's that no matter who you are and what you do in relations to Drupal and digital work, we all want to make a positive impact on as many people as possible every day. How many people would agree with this statement? That's what you seek to do. All right, good. Just about all the hands. I don't think anyone here seeks to build something or design something to make it so that it's not usable by somebody. You seek out to build something that your clients say, this is great for our users, that your company says, this is great for our business. You want to build something that makes a positive impact. And I think that's important to realize. That's what we all have in common, because that's essentially what inclusive design is. So the definition of inclusive design is that it is planning the considerations to ensure that a product, a service, an environment is as usable by as many people as possible to the greatest extent possible. It's about making a positive impact on as many people as you can every day. Now, inclusive design, it's not new. Maybe it's new to some of us, especially in relation to the work we do. We think of building for accessibility. But inclusive design has been around for quite a long time. And it's based on this idea of universal design, which was a term coined in the 1960s. And universal design is actually about physical spaces and building physical spaces to make sure they're usable. The term itself was coined by Ronald L. Mace, who was an architect. And what he did, he founded the Center for Universal Design, and he would look at architectural plans and all the architectural work he did and make sure, is this space usable? Is it as usable as possible? Is there any barriers that we have to plan around to make sure the public can use this space? It was around a lot of public spaces. On top of that was Sluin Goldsmith, who was also an architect, and he came up with the term barrier-free design. And what he actually did was looked at architectural plans, again, mainly for public spaces, and looked for physical barriers, whether they were support structures, stairs, curbs, what have you, and said, can we get rid of this and make it more accessible for people? What can we do to change that? And then Patricia Moore, who's an industrial designer, And what she was known for doing is actually dressing up as an elderly person, restricting her movements and experiencing the world that way, and providing a write-up on the troubles she had and how it could be improved, from using public parks to public transportation, and a whole slew of methods. And she provided a lot of great insight, and I think she still does, on how an area can be improved. So the three of them together kind of inclusively, saying inclusively is funny, but the three of them together helped foster this idea of inclusive design that got carried over into the digital world. Now, for universal design, something that we all experience every day that you probably don't even realize is part of it, but I like to call out, is the sloped curb. Right? So when you're walking down the street, you may notice when you go across the street, the sidewalk slopes down to meet the road. Now, this is part of ADA compliance. It's actually part from universal design and the work of those three individuals that led to this. And the idea of it is to help people with accessibility needs, people in wheelchairs, people with walkers, people with crutches, and it definitely helps them transition between the sidewalk across the street safely. But inclusively, the slope curve benefits a lot more people. If you think about delivery drivers with hand trucks and moving goods and services, parents with strollers that they have to safely get their kids across the street, and it's hard. I have a 1-year-old daughter, so I know it's hard to get a stroller up and down a curb. It makes it easier for them to transition. Distracted people on their cell phones, whether they are distracted by the latest news or, on a lighter note, Pokemon Go that they're trying to capture. We're buried in our phones. We don't pay attention to where we're walking. The slope curbs make sure people don't trip. So if you think inclusively, the slope curb helps beyond the accessibility needs it was designed for a broader range of people. And this is why I say inclusive design is about thinking beyond accessibility, especially in our digital world. Right? When we build something, when we're planning the UX, when we're planning our front-end development, how we're going to build something, we think about these accessibility needs, and these are great to pay attention to. Vision, hearing impairment, cognitive ability, mobility, the ability to use a keyboard or mouse. Paying attention to these definitely helps us make a positive impact on way more people with our products. The thing is, humans differ way more than just accessibility needs, and these differences impact the way they experience the digital world. So someone's location, someone's gender, someone's language, their education level, their age, all these play a factor in how they interact with the products we build and the products we deliver and the products we hope make a positive impact. So inclusive design is about thinking beyond just that small scope of accessibility issues and thinking about, well, what are the other differences and how can we build to make sure we're accommodating for them? When I was learning about inclusive design, I came across the 10 principles of inclusive design that were developed by Sandy Wasmer. She's a UX designer in the UK, and actually in 2009, she was contracted by the UK government to help them develop 10 principles that they can apply to all the digital products they build. So all the websites, applications that are built for their citizens that range in capabilities. I'm not going to go through all 10 of them, but I think they're really important. They provide a good foundation for thinking about the inclusiveness of our digital products. So much so for the UK government that in 2010 they built these into their e-accessibility action plan. So every website they build, best of my knowledge, they go through these 10 points and make sure they're touching on each one of them. Sandy has on her website a blog post about more in depth each one of these 10 principles. I'll link to it at the end of the presentation as well. So when I originally came up with this presentation, I wanted to take those 10 principles, I wanted to use them in my day-to-day work, but I needed something that was a little more digestible for myself to remember and to use every day. So I came up with what I call my 4 pillars of inclusive design. These are 4 convictions I believe if everyone in this room, if we believe in each one of these and we pull them into all the work we do, we can build something that makes a positive impact on as many people as possible. So my 4 pillars are that no user is average, that every user deserves equal access, to provide understandable content for every user, and that every user deserves trust and respect. I will put Creative Commons 4.0 license on this, so free to use them. Go ahead. I love open source. So what I want to do for the rest of this presentation is talk through each one of these 4 pillars, explain to you how you can implement them and what they mean to the work that you do, and show that it's not something that needs to be a crazy extra line item that you sell to your clients or to your boss. It's just changing the way we approach the work we do to make our products as usable as possible. So no user is average. If we believe that no user is average, we have to change from the beginning how we approach the work that we build. I think we have, and I use we collectively, this idea that we can make assumptions about our user base and build with that. That way we can work with our clients to guess who their users are, and we can build for those. But what we actually have to do, if we believe this, is we have to recognize we have to learn who the people are that are going to use our products. We have to learn their differences and take those into account for everything we do. And there's an important lesson to learn about assuming no user is average that comes from the 1950s with the US Air Force. So in the 1950s, the US Air Force had this new jet that they were trying to roll out. They were having very bad results with it, sometimes fatally so. So they assumed, okay, these jets aren't performing well, it must be the pilots. Let's get some new pilots in there. They swapped out all the pilots, still no improvements in performance. They said to themselves, not the pilots, must be the trainers. Let's swap out the trainers, retrain the pilots, no improvement. Not the trainers, must be the training material. Rewrote the training material, retrained the trainers retrained the pilots, no improvements. Took a while, but what they realized was the problem of these jets was the interface, the cockpit. The cockpit, when it was put out to bid to be built, the Air Force has all these metrics on all their airmen. The military has great metrics, measurements, and they found the average pilot from weight to size to length, and they said, build a cockpit that works for our average, making the assumption that if you build for the average, it's going to benefit everybody. The problem is there was no airman that was average. Everybody differed. So no one could build a cockpit because the cockpit was built for nobody. So they rebuilt the cockpit, they made changes so that it could be adjustable, and all of a sudden they saw vast improvements. How many people here have ever driven in a car? I expect all the hands, right? How many people here have ever adjusted the steering wheel or a seat in a car? You have this project to thank for that. They put in adjustable seats, adjustable controls. And that got carried through now to the general public, right? You just don't get into a car and the steering wheel is where it's at, the seat is where it's at. You can adjust it to meet your needs, and you drive safer. Now, this talk came from actually a TED Talk I had seen called The Myth of Average by Todd Rose, who I always like to call out that he is a Harvard professor and a high school dropout. I think that's an interesting fact. But in his TED Talk, he brings up this fact with a story that if you design for the average, you are literally designing for nobody. The Air Force realized this in the 50s. We should realize this for our digital products. If we are assuming the average user, we are building our products for nobody. And we shouldn't be surprised when very few people actually can use our products successfully. Right, so this is the idea that the average user does not exist. The average pilot didn't exist. Our average user doesn't exist. We can't just use whatever analytical data we have to assume the average measurement and build for that. We have to plan beyond that. We need to get a sense of how do our users actually use our products? What devices do they use? How are they actually interacting with it? And plan for those differences. Just don't try to make assumptions. Try to build in ways that we can allow people to adjust our products to meet their needs and get a better benefit from it. So one of the ways we can do this, how many people here know about personas or have used personas? So personas is the idea of putting a face and a name and a background to an imaginary user that fits the use case that you're trying to build against. And personas are great because they help your whole team, from the client to the designers to the UX to the developers, focus on the same sort of ideas and build to that person to make sure it works. So we could add limitations into our personas to make sure we're accounting for actual differences that have to be adjusted for. For example, we can have a persona that has red-green color blindness. This impacts our design, impacts how we call attention to items. Color blindness affects a lot of people, and it's going to affect what calls to action they notice. Or has a broken wrist due to a skiing accident. This is a temporary disability, but can they still navigate to our donations page, to our About Us, to our mission statement? Or does most of the work while traveling? They're in a cramped, distracted environment. Maybe they're high profile, so what's the most important information we have to deliver to them? How can we do it the fastest to make sure they get it? I think this last one has much more of effect on a lot of people because we do a lot of mobile browsing. People are all over the place. People are distributed. So 3 different ways to limit your persona, just ideas, from something that someone can't control to something that's temporary to something that affects how a person interacts every day. And doing this makes us think differently about every aspect of our project. Something else I think we can do is personalize the experience. So when we hear personalization, I'm sure everyone here makes the same connection of personalization of content, that we're changing what's on the page in terms of content based on analytics that we know about the users, other data we know about the user. And that's great. That helps deliver a better experience. But what about using those analytics to influence the interface? How can we learn about our actual users, how they're browsing our products, and then change our interface for that? Not just the content, but the way the content's organized, the way we lay out the content, the way we allow them to interact with it. So we can do this by collecting feedback when possible. The state of Massachusetts did this with their mass.gov project. They had a pilot program when they did the redesign. It's built in Drupal, by the way. I mean, there's a couple of talks about it at this conference. But they had a pilot program where they released it to the public. Anyone could go and see it and then provide feedback to say, these website changes work for me or they don't. Here's why. Can we do that when we are implementing? Can we have users come in and actually test our products? Can you convince your client that that's a good idea with user experience? And then iterate to meet user behaviors. Just don't build it. Did I spell behaviors correctly? I think I spelled it correctly. Just don't build it, deliver it, and consider it done. Your website, your digital product should always be a work in progress. Again, go back, collect actual information about how people are interacting with it, and make tweaks, make adjustments, make it better. I think if we can do this and we personalize beyond the content, but provide a personalized experience on the whole, we can make products better. So if we believe that no user is average, we have to stop assuming that we can just guess who the users are. We have to figure out how we're going to learn who our actual users are, their differences, and how we can build for those differences and make it so they can take control of our products. Pillar number 2, every user deserves equal access. If we believe that every user deserves equal access, we have to throw out the idea that every user has a Google Fiber connection, the top speed, Retina displays. We have to understand that users are spread out across the globe, their connections are different, their devices are different, and we can't accommodate for each one of those, but we want to make sure we provide a positive experience for each one. So interesting statistic from, this is from Q1 of 2017. 44% of internet browsing is from a desktop, only 44%. The rest is from tablets, which is about 3%, and then mobile. Mobile and tablets, there's a whole range of devices that covers that. That also means there's a whole range of connections that cover that and the way people see our content, how it's organized on the page. So for a majority of our users, we have no idea how they're accessing our products. We can't make assumptions they're on a desktop because that's a lower percentage. So if we can't control or even know what devices, I mean, through analytics you can learn devices that are popular for your product, but if we can't control that or know that, what can we do to make sure we're delivering a positive experience no matter what connection someone has? I think we can structure our content in a way that makes sense, and there's a number of ways to do this. You can use semantic markup. So semantic markup is the guidelines for how to use, specifically around HTML, pretty much every single HTML element and why you use it. A small company you might have heard of called the BBC, across the pond, they have guidelines that are open source that anyone can view on how they use semantic markup, from emphasis lists to H2 tags, everything in between. They have guidelines about when and where and how you should use elements, and they stick to the semantic markups that browsers use to render content. We should stick to that too, so that we're not just using our title tags for a design purpose, we're using it for the purpose it's meant to be used for calling out a title of a page. Doing so means no matter what device someone's on, it's going to be rendered, that content's going to be rendered the same way for the same purpose. We can use inclusive design patterns in our development and our UX. I have a link here to a book called Inclusive Design Patterns. It's a really helpful book. It tells you how to do everything from carousels to any sort of other table. I'm not a fan of carousels, but in an inclusive way that works for accessibility needs, that works for people who have JavaScript disabled potentially. It's just how to be smart about the patterns you build for your components. It's a really interesting read. And we can use that in our work as well, making sure we're sticking to these patterns that work for inclusive needs. And then we can use progressive design to deliver our experiences. So progressive design is the idea that you're designing the minimum you have to do to emphasize what's important to the user. And then as you learn more about the user's connection, what they have for a display, using data that you can get from their browser, you're adding on top of that. So it's the idea of what information is on the page, what's the minimum you have to do to highlight what you want the user to pay attention to. That's progressive design, and building on top of that to add more flashes and lens flares or whatever you want to do. And what's important about semantic markup, inclusive patterns, progressive design is that it benefits your users and your clients. It may be hard to get them to understand this because they want that flashy, nice design, but you can tell them, you know, look, your deafest, blindest, least cares about design user is Google. And every client that you have is going to care what Google thinks about their product and how it can read their information. If you're using semantic markup, if you're using inclusive patterns, if you're making sure that content's laid out in a progressive way, Google can read that, can index it, and deliver your product to the right audience on the right search terms. It knows how to ingest your content. And clients care about that. Another statistic, the average global internet speed is 7.2 megabits per second. Bytes, bits, I always get it wrong. Bits? All right, thank you. I should know that, but it's one of those things I always Google. I have a computer science degree. That's very poor that I don't know that. Anyways, 7.2 megabits per second. That's the average. So let's not think about the average user. What's the extremes here? The Republic of Mali has the slowest connection at 0.5. The other end of the spectrum is South Korea at 28.6. That's a wide margin of difference. And what's important to note here is not that you have to do this extreme for all your projects, but if you are building something and you're only testing for South Korea, did I say North Korea? Oh. South Korea. South Korea. If you're only building for South Korea experience, they're going to have, everything's going to load really quickly, they're going to have a great time. Everyone who has a slower connection is going to have degraded, worse experience. But if you're building for, say, the Republic of Mali, and it loads quickly, loads efficiently, the most important thing comes to the page first at 0.5 megabits, everyone who has a better connection is going to have even more better of an experience. So learning from Pillar 1 about your actual users and the differences in their connection speeds, pay attention, what's the slowest that you need to pay attention to? If you're building for, say, North America, there's a lot of people who are on DSL connections still, and that impacts the speed they have. Build for that. Make sure that's a positive experience, and you know everyone who has a better connection is going to have a different experience, a better experience. I will say, when I was updating this presentation, I finally learned for the first time ever, the US is in the top 10 connection speeds. Before that, we were not in the top 10. We have an average of 18.7 megabits per second. To put this into perspective, the Republic of Mali, if you were to load Amazon.com, it takes over 6 seconds to load at 0.5. I don't know if they're Amazon's target audience, but Amazon probably wants to improve that experience. So how can we test for this? How can we make sure we're building for this? We have tools to artificially limit ourselves. We're developers here. We know the developer tools we have. If you're using a modern browser, Firefox, Chrome, you can throttle your connection. You can tell Chrome or Firefox, hey, I want to simulate that I'm on a DSL connection, that I'm on 3G, that I have 0.5 megabits per second. You can set your browser to do that and see how you experience your product. How can you make improvements when you do that? We can disable JavaScript. Is our product still usable without JavaScript? Now, if you're building a decoupled system, maybe not, and that's not your use case. But if you're building like a traditional themed Drupal website or a Drupal product, can your user still navigate through your menu system to get to your donation page without having to wait for JavaScript to load? Can they navigate without a mouse? Again, people being on different devices, they may not have a mouse available. Can they do a couple button clicks to get to the most important information? Going back to the idea of personas with limitations, Is it a CEO you want to reach who has a broken wrist because they were skiing, that you want them to be able to figure out how to contact your agency to get your business? Can they do that without navigating through the mouse? I think these are just some ideas of how to artificially limit yourself to make sure your product's still usable. So if we believe that every user deserves equal access, we have to learn about the actual differences of locations and devices that our users have. We have to plan for those differences and make sure we're delivering for, quote unquote, the worst experience, making sure that's as positive as we can make it and then improve upon that. Pillar number 3, to provide understandable content for every user. If we believe in providing understandable content for every user, we all have to come to a fundamental truth that we all know, but no one likes to admit, is that our designs, our UX, our clever algorithms and functions that we write, we love them. We like to share them. We have conferences where we talk about cool patterns to do. The truth is, though, our users don't care about that. The only thing users care about, the only reason they use your products is for information, is for content. That's why they're using it. They're trying to get some sort of content. So we have to understand that's the most important thing to our users. So we want to make sure we're delivering content that the greatest extent of users can understand and use. It's all about providing how quickly can we provide our message and how simply can we deliver the most important message for our products. The City of Boston in 2016 did a redesign of their website. This is the new website. I'll still say it's new. Genuine had a hand in helping build this. It's built on top of Drupal, and it looks much better. It's a lot cleaner. If you do a Wayback Machine to look at their old website, it was very retro. It was very heavy. The explanation for the old website that compared to the new website that I like was from the city's chief of information technology in an interview with the Boston Globe, where they said the website should act like a helpful human. This is one of the big differences between the old site and the new site. On the old site, it would feel like you're interacting with some sort of lawyer robot that was speaking to you in government speak. I mean, that says a lot for a city website. The original website was built pretty much with the input of the city employees for the city employees. You had to know what department, what sub-department, the way it was organized to get to any information. They threw that idea out when they went through this redesign and thought about who are actual users, what do they care about? Who are the citizens of the city of Boston? What information do they need, and how do they need to access it? And they took that input to change how they're writing their content, how they're displaying it, and how they're rendering it. One of the things we can do in our digital products that the city of Boston did was be as clear and direct as we can with the content we provide. We need to use simple phrasing and avoid jargon where possible. Now, if you're building something, a product for like a scientific journal, obviously there's going to be a lot of jargon. It's harder to simplify phrasing. But if you're building a website for a company, how can you explain what that company is about the simplest way so that the greatest number of people can understand that message? We want to pay attention to our font, our spacing, and our line length. So people who have dyslexic disabilities, or not disabilities, what's the word I want? People who are dyslexic, serif fonts are hard to read. The feet, the serifs run together, words look like they're crossed out, it's hard to understand. Using sans serif fonts, for example, or variable fonts, I know Jason had a talk on that yesterday, makes the wording cleaner so that more people can understand it. Spacing, that word's not too tightly spaced together, that it's clear to see separations of word, makes them understandable. And then line length. Has anyone here heard of the F pattern in terms of reading content? A couple hands. So the F pattern is how people read content on the web, and it goes like this. They read the first line, they read the second line, they read half of the third line, half of the fourth line, quarter of the fifth line. They start to scan. The more dense your content, the more your users are going to miss information. So and there's no matching number for this, but what is the minimum amount of characters we have to put on a line with our simple phrasing to get our point across so users scan less and understand more? And then the final thing is be meaningful. Don't write lawyer robot government speak. Write content for humans by humans. And we can use tools that help us do this by checking what's known as the readability score. So if you've heard of readability score, you may have heard of people say, oh, this is an 8th grade reading level, this is a college reading level. Now, that's not about the education level you need to have for that content. It's about the mental capacity, the mental energy it takes to understand what was written. Readability scores, the average right now, they say that it's great, is a 6th grade reading level. That means it takes enough energy that if someone's familiar with the topic or the language, they still take away, they don't get bored with it. But someone who's new to the language, new to the topic, it's not complex enough that they can't understand or follow along. There are ways you can check readability. If you use any sort of text editor, like Word or whatnot, they have tools and plugins that can deliver a readability score to you using algorithms. I like using Hemingway app. I'm not advocating for one technology or another. This is just a free one I like to use. You put your content in there, you paste it in, and it will highlight hard to read sentences, long sentences. It'll check the readability. It'll highlight words that could be more simplified. Or phrasing that be simplified. It doesn't catch everything, but it gives you an idea of how complex is your content and can you make it simpler? Can you make it easier to understand so that more people can get your messaging? I use this from everything, from my tweets to my emails, especially to my conversations with clients when I have to explain technical things. I want to make sure it's as simple as possible. When I write content for session presentations, I put it in here and I simplify it. So it's a great way to check how hard is it going to be for your content to be understood, and can you simplify that? Another thing we can do is understand that our content is not just what we write on the page, but it's anything that's on the page that informs and guides our users. So error messaging. Can we write it in a way and plan for it so that it's helpful and not alarming? When someone forgets to fill out a field or they fill it out incorrectly in a form, does that say, oh, you've missed a field, and they have to figure out through some small red border that field they had to fill out? No, can we provide something that says, hey, you must provide your first name and last name, we require that. We want to plan a user's journey from your, I'll just say from your homepage to your product checkout page. How do you want to help guide a user through content to make that full journey? What information can you provide to help guide them to understand what the next step is in the process? Plan a user's journey, how you would like to see your users work through your website, your application, and then build content that helps facilitate that. And then provide contextual relations. Look, computers are great at relating things together. In Drupal, you have taxonomy terms where you can link things together. You can build Drupal views that then show related content based on taxonomy. That's great, and use those tools, but content and what humans understand is very complex. We understand a lot of complex things, and the way content relates together may not be as straightforward as taxonomy terms. I think the city of Boston did a great job with contextual relations of content and controlling it on their homepage, which I highlight here. They have, and these change every day. I think they have people curate this content that shows up on the homepage. But they relate content not just by terms that they're similar, but by ways that they understand people might want to relate to it. For example, I have highlighted here that if you want to know about street cleaning or parking meters, you probably want to know about tow lots. And being someone who's lived in the city for a long time, I can tell you, if you don't know the street cleaning schedule, you want to know about the tow lots. These are contextually related, so they show up near each other. They're not technically related by department, related by terms, but they have a human connection. Can you do that with your content when you're trying to display, hey, you may want to also check out this other product. You may want to check out this other page on our website. Is there a contextual, human contextual thing that you can give to your publishers or your content editors where they can make those relations for humans by humans? So if we believe in providing understandable content for every user, we have to recognize that the information we give to our users is the most important thing they care about. They don't care about our designs. They don't care about how we implement something. They want information. How can we deliver it to them? By doing so, we lower barriers for new users by making our content as simple as possible to understand. And we invite new users in, and we prevent ourselves from being lawyer robots. Pillar number 4, to provide every user with trust and respect. Just as we have to, in the last pillar, understand that every user comes to our website for content, we also have to understand that the most precious thing that a user has is their private information. We may need that information. We may want that information, and we have to understand that if we want a user to give it to us, we can't just take it, especially with the laws today. We can't just take it. We have to give them a reason to give it to us. We have to build a trust with our users to provide that information so we can learn about them and refine our product to better suit their needs. When I was first learning about inclusive design, the very first time I heard about it was with this talk, Inclusive Design Excluding No Gender, by Sarah Liren. She's a UX developer out of Sweden, I believe. And the sum of her talk, she's giving it on podcasts like the UX podcast and conferences around the world. But the sum of her presentation that just was mind-blowing to me is that the easiest way to do inclusive design is stop asking about gender. What Sarah Liren means with this is when she has a new client and she's going through a redesign of their product, if they have a form and it asks for someone's gender, she stops and says, "Why are you collecting this information? What are you doing with it?" Most of the time, from her accounts, clients just say, "Well, we've just always collected it." And she says, "Stop. Why are you collecting it if you're not doing anything with it? You're putting up a barrier that's preventing users from providing you information so that you can learn about them." On top of that, if her clients do have a reason why they're collecting gender, she says, "Great, I see you have radio buttons for male or female. Do you have to do it that way? People identify very differently. Let's change the way we do that so that your users can provide their actual information." What I abstract from this is all about us controlling and understanding what information do we actually need and having a reason for it, and then what control can we give to our users to make sure they're providing as accurate information as possible. Now, Drupal.org, just to show for gender, when you have a Drupal.org account, it has a gender question, but it's not just male or female, it has other options. And there's plenty of discussions on changing these options, adopting different things. I'm not going to get to that debate. But the purpose here is that they provide you options so you better control how you share that information. It's not required. You don't have to share it. But if you want to, it helps the association learn more about the demographics of the Drupal community. We can do, not just for gender, but for anything we collect for our products. Focus on only the information we need. Anytime the product you're building, if it's for your company, for your client, especially if it's around forms or collecting information, you need to be able to ask yourself, why do we need this data? And you have to be able to answer it. If you can't answer that, don't collect that information. Every field you throw up there provides a barrier to some user who doesn't want to share that information, and they're going to abandon your product. On top of that, what options can we give our users? Just like Sarah Liren asks with her clients, like the Drupal.org example, do you have to put in a small bucket of options from a list they select from? Can you make it an open text field that a user can tell you exactly their information? And most importantly is understanding, why should a user give this to us? What reason are we telling a user this is why you should provide us this information? Or are we just hoping that they'll fill out all our form fields? Are we just hoping we'll get that information and then we'll have something to do with it? Or are we going to tell our users why we want this information, what we're going to do with it, and how it helps them and benefits their experience with our products? A good example of this is Pinterest. And yes, I have a Pinterest account because of this presentation. Pinterest, when you sign up for an account, they have a gender question, male or female. It's not required. It's very limited. But they have an information button. When you click it, it says, hey, knowing your gender helps us better deliver you search results to show on your boards. You don't identify of either one of these, tell us what your gender is. Customize it to be exact for who you are. And they use that information to better refine their product for their users. Now, this screenshot is honestly a few years old now, about 2 years old, so I'm sure it's changed and it's gotten better. But it just shows that you provide your users with their control, they're more likely to provide you that information. They trust, you know what you're doing with it, they know what you're doing with it, and that they'll give it to you. On top of that, we need to be responsible with the data they give us. This is very important. We have to explain how we're going to use any data that a user is going to provide to us. The example of Pinterest, they did that. They say, this is what we use gender for. Anytime you're collecting information, cookies, form data, session information, cookies especially, like I said, for cookie policies, we need to explain this is why we're collecting the data, and this is how we're going to use it. Users need to understand that so they feel comfortable either providing it to you or not. If they're not going to provide it to you and you need it for your business, you don't want the users to get frustrated. You only want the users who are comfortable. Explain how the data is protected. Again, for cookie policies, for just privacy information policies, saying, great, you're giving us your data, you can trust it with us for these reasons, this is what we're going to do with it. There are big companies out there who don't do this. We see a lot of data breaches in the news, right? And if they're not protecting our data, users who come to your smaller, I'm going to assume smaller websites than say Home Depot, they're going to feel uncomfortable giving you a whole bunch of information. So explain how it's going to be protected, what you're going to do to protect it. And then make sure you give users control of their data. Especially now with GDPR in place, which is the General Data Protection Regulations out of the EU. You have to give users control of their data, especially if you're dealing with anyone from outside the US, basically. You have to say, this is your information. I understand that we're just asked to look at it, but it's in your control. At any time, you can change your information. At any time, you can review the information we have on you. At any time, you can remove your information. That helps build that trust with your users. Building that trust, giving them control, helps them, if they feel comfortable giving you information, that they're going to provide it as accurately as possible. You're going to use that to better inform your decisions on your UX, your design, and your content, and being more inclusive of the broad brand of your users. So if we believe in providing every user with trust and respect, what's going to happen is we're going to understand that we don't control any user's data, we're just asking for it. And we have to give them valid reasons why they can provide it to us and why they're willing to give it to us and what we're going to do with it. We're going to be able to use that information to better inform our decisions and refine our product to make it more inclusive of more people. This has the potential of increasing user satisfaction, increasing user engagement, potentially increasing user loyalty. Loyalty is very hard in the market nowadays, no matter what vertical you're in. So building user loyalty by building trust and respect is very important to keeping those repeating users. So that's my 4 pillars. No user is average. Every user deserves equal access. To provide understandable content for every user, and every user deserves our trust and respect. Is there anyone here who feels like on their current or next project they could implement one of these pillars in some sort of way? Raise your hand. Thank you. Everyone in the room for the recording. Everyone in the room raised their hand. Because you agreed to that, I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to make it easier to understand. Down to 2 words for each one. No average, equal access, understandable content, trust and respect. That's what it comes down to. If we can do these things on all our products, what's going to happen? Is that every day when we go to work, when we go to build something, we're going to make a positive impact on as many people as possible. So with that, I have some resources. I have starting in the top left, I'll go across. They're all bit.ly links. I have this presentation at D4D IDX. It's annotated slides because I know you're going to experience differently later on. You're not going to hear me speak, so all the content is written out in the slides. IDX Principles, which is Sandy Wassmer's 10 Principles of Inclusive Design, her blog post on it. IDX Average Myth is Todd Rose's talk. It's a TED Talk on the myth of average. The link to the BBC Semantic Guidelines, I recommend you check them out for your projects, as well as the book Inclusive Design Patterns at IDX Patterns. And then Sarah Laren's talk on inclusive design, excluding no gender. That was a really eye-opening talk for me a few years ago. I recommend just listening to it, and hopefully it'll change the way you approach your products. So with that, I'll put the slide back up in a moment, but I want to say thank you. I welcome feedback so I can get that, iterate over my presentation, and make it better for the next audience. And we have some minutes for questions, so if anyone has any questions, we can take them now after applause. So thank you. Any questions? Nailed it. All right, well, hopefully this is helpful. If you don't have any questions. If you have questions later on, you don't want to be in the recording, I'll be around. Oh, there's a question. I missed it. I'm sorry.
So at Genuine, when you're talking about some of the, I forget which pillar, but when you're talking about non-mouse users or some of the more accessibility, kind of core accessibility stuff. Logistically, like, is that table stakes for a scope of work? Is that a line item that a client can redline when you're negotiating, or is it just sort of baked in and they can't isolate it to remove it because you...
That's a good question. So just
nonprofit clients, so I wonder how that works out.
Yeah, so to rephrase the question, to my understanding for the recording, is when dealing with like accessibility requirements, is that a separate line item that then a client can knock off And if so, how do you deal with that? I will say at Genuine, it is not. We, especially with our front-end team, we build everything for 508 compliance the best we can. And the way I equate that to, and I mention it sometimes in this talk, is years ago, we used to tell clients, hey, you need a desktop website. Now pay us separately for a mobile website. Then we said, you know what, you need an adaptive website that can work for either or. You need a responsive website. You don't even put that as a line item anymore, right? It's assumed that you're going to build a website that's responsive. You should build it into your process that you're building a website that's accessible. It's not a line item that a client can remove because it's going to be detrimental to them. It's going to be detrimental to the product you deliver. And it only delivers them a value. So if you have a separate line item, most likely they're going to be like, we don't want to pay for this. And that's a stain on your reputation as the experts of building something that's going to help your clients reach their greatest number of users. If you need to explain it beyond accessibility and talk about, that's why I like bringing up Google, is that, look, you need this, one, for legal purposes, depending on your vertical and your industry, but also it's going to help your website be better discovered by other users. So we don't even make it a separate line item, we just bake it into our products.
That's right. So what about the client that's like, well, I hate serif fonts, or I love serif fonts?
Yeah, I mean, so that's just a suggestion. You don't always have control over that. I think as long as you think about and learn about who the users are and what expectations there are, and then talk to your client about, look, here's the trade-offs for this. Is this something, do we have to use sans serif fonts? No, but here's how the design will look with it. Here's why we chose this. This is our recommendation for this purpose. The client can always say, great, we paid for this font on Font Awesome, we want to use it. And sometimes you have to be like, okay, it's going to have this negative effect, but in the grand scheme of things, is that as big of a deal? Probably not. So it's about having, I think, those open conversations with your clients about those trade-offs.
So I've got a question for you. I work in a manufacturing electronic company, and we have a site here, and we have a site in China for our China plant. It wasn't working really well because of the slow upload, so we uploaded it over to Alibaba, and it's still running slow, and they want me to get rid of all the design. It's very frustrating because they want pictures really small, and it's like, how do you make something look pretty but still functional over there?
Whew. So the question was, I'm going to isolate for China, right? When moving them to like Alibaba, and how do you remove the designs to make something still look appealing but be functional and as fast as possible? I don't think there's any magic answer to that. I will say, going back to the idea of progressive design, taking it back, like, what's the most important thing that you need to deliver? Is it the design, or is it the information? Right? And then from that, what can you add onto it a little bit more? I'm not a designer, but I will say, and I know designers will hate me for this, like, strip away the design. See what you get. Does the information make sense? If it does, great. Start with that and then build on top of that and see how that impacts your experience. Because then if you test for that and you can iterate through, all right, well, this design flourish included so much CSS and visual data that it slowed it down 10 times. Can we simplify it even more? I think it's a refinement process. There's no, like, hit these buttons and it's going to be great. You have to test and iterate.
Thank you.
I know that's probably not the answer you're hoping for. It's the best I can do. No others? I'll always take another round of applause if there's no. I always ask for that, and I always feel bad about it. But I always get it, so. All right, thank you everyone for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference.